Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me, as always, is my brother Brennan. Together, we make movies with the DBS Films. Today's episode, we are talking about what we've learned making 6 found footage feature films. That is right, my friends. We have made a lot of found footage movies now, especially after this year. And you can take a look at one of them, Horror in the Forest, which is out online. A Cold Grave could potentially be out right now. So get used to hearing me say this. At any point in time, a Cold Grave could be out there. So we'd really appreciate, as always, being part of the launch team. Giving us a review and a rental when it comes out means the world to us. It allows us to keep making movies for our fans with our fans. So really, these episodes, we're just going to kind of highlight exactly some of the tips, some of our theories, all of that fun stuff that comes along with making 6 found footage feature films. I like it. A good alliteration is something I really enjoy. So let's hop right into this episode. I think the best place to really start at first is, why is found footage something that we have leaned into, especially during this year? To give you guys an idea, 2 of the 8 of the Hateful Eight movies are found footage. Into the Forest is our first one, and The Haunting of the Suicide House. But then after The Forest of Death, we are on a found footage bender with us making 4 features, about to be our 5th one coming up in a few weeks. So we have really leaned into that process. And I really want to kind of highlight what the major benefits are. In my opinion, I think we've always said really the main one that allows you to kind of continue and do this process, and why it works a lot with the DBS model, is it is a lot easier to get through production. Typically, found footage can be more contained. That being said, there is a double-edged sword, which is it can be oftentimes limiting to film. So you want to talk about that whole principle of found footage, because I think that's really kind of critical. And if you're deciding if you want to make a found footage or cinematic feature.
Well, I think found footage is really good if it's your first movie or your first couple of movies. I think that it allows you to tell a story that you want to tell. You don't have to rely so much on editing. You don't need to rely so much on basically shooting and having cinematic gear and having cinematic stuff, basically to try and cheat the Netflix look. You don't need to worry about that. A lot of people like gritty found footage movies. You basically just need, a regular camera, and I just use an 18 to 35 millimeter lens, and that's all I need. So it's very minimalistic. It's very easy to get it done. You don't have to worry about issues or mistakes in there because you can glitch the camera or you can just hard cut. So it's very forgiving with basically a first time filmmaker where you're going to make mistakes instead of having to go and do pickups, which you would have to do with a cinematic movie. You can kind of cheat around them and it kind of gives it like a grittier look. So that's all good. The downside is what we're experiencing now is if you want to tell a deeper story, a better story, have something a little bit more cinematic, it's very difficult to do that. And I think that found footage style was really good for Horror in the Forest, and it was really good for the Bigfoot Project, but I do not think it was good for Girl in Cabin 14. And it'll be debatable whether or not it's good for Murder House. I think it is. There's a lot of paranormal investigation movies where they go into the house, but once again, I think we're getting to the point now where we have really good special effects. We are really good at cinematic and lighting, and I really want to have some cool ending climax scenes. We've been working really hard on getting our climaxes to where they need to go. And in found footage movies, you can't really have a fight sequence. We kind of do it in ways to kind of cheat it a little bit, but you're not going to get that kind of basically cinematic climax that you kind of want. And this is why a lot of found footage movies, kind of run around, and then off camera they meet their demise, or they fall in front of the camera with blood and guts on them because you can't really show them dying too well. So it's something to consider. And working with actors now and getting better actors and just refining our process, you lose a lot of emotion and cutaways and facial shots and reaction shots with found footage, and I do think that kind of hurts the story a little bit. I think, it's a common trope with found footage where like, oh, the acting is not very good. And a lot of that's just because their people are starting out, they're lower budget. But I also think that not having reaction shots, not having, facial expressions in there, not being able to see the fear in people's faces can impact the acting in there because you're really only limited to wide shots. So it's definitely a dual-edged sword. I think if it's your first couple of movies or your very limited budget, as in, you're probably under 50K, I say take a look at found footage because you can take a concept and you can test it out and you can get your feet wet and you have a better shot at getting something that's going to get uploaded. If you are a little bit more seasoned and you're more experienced in this or you have a higher budget than cinematic, you kind of want to lean there. That being said, I will always incorporate found footage stuff into cinematic. And I honestly think that this is where we're going to go to, where we're not going full cinematic or we're not going full high or found footage, but I think you can be cinematic. And then anytime you have scares or something spooky happening, you can go right back to that first person view. Cause I really think that what makes found footage so unique is when you are that person. When you go to that first person view, you teleport to them. And our scares in the found footage movies have been much, much higher than the cinematic ones.
Exactly that. We're searching for that holy grail of the hybrid cinematic and found footage look. So I think I kind of want to, in this first episode, dig into the principles, and then we can kind of go in part two, give you a little bit of the tips and tricks. What you mentioned, I think is super critical when you said, this can really be that first feature film. And we actually, I believe it was the first feature film. It's called The Who Incident. We love to take a look at indie filmmakers out there. I believe it was their first feature. They might have something else, but it was very, very well done. And I think it's the great intro into filmmaking because you can focus on the basics. And I think really the basics are going to be your audio, your video, and then most importantly, getting out of post-production. And I think the big difference between found footage and cinematic is, again, when you are limited with what you have, you are one almost kind of more thoughtful in getting it in the moment of filming. It's when you're filming in found footage, I feel like it's less of, will this cut together, because there's no such thing as a cut together. I mean, you can kind of cut with different angles as what we're doing, but for the most part you really force yourself to be in the moment. And the biggest one is when you're in post-production with cinematic, there is so many different angles and resources and cuts and takes and all of these things. Whereas in found footage, I feel like it almost gives you momentum to where, we say post-production is where movies go to die. And I really feel like with found footage, you kind of get halfway through it. And I think if, again, to me, getting that first feature film out there, completing it, getting it uploaded, that is the achievement, regardless of the quality of it. Now, obviously, you want to make it good, but again, that's kind of saying, I want to go up there first time I'm touching a guitar and play the best solo ever. I'm going to go ahead and lift 400 pounds right now. It is, to me, the best way to kind of ease into it. And I mainly think it's because that hurdle in post-production is much lower. What are kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the big benefit of found footage is if you don't have a lot of experience editing, that you can edit it very quickly. I feel like anybody can edit found footage because it's mainly oneers and it goes really quick. To give you an example, I know Kel pretty much does an edit of our movies while we're on set. And I just got done with pretty much the first pass of the Bigfoot project. And it took me maybe 10, 15 hours to just kind of just put it all together. And it's not going to be the final product by any means, but it only took 10 to 15 hours to basically have a very good idea of the pacing of the movie and what we need to kind of fix up and where I need to spend my time. And cinematic, if you're trying to do that, it'd take you a lot more because there's just so much more footage, there's so much more cuts, there's just so much more decisions you have to make. And I think that's fine with an experienced editor. You want to lean on the side of having a lot of footage. But if you're inexperienced, you can kind of drown yourself in that and you kind of get paralyzed by just all the choices that you can make. With found footage, there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, all right, this is a shot we got to go with, and I can't really do anything with that. With cinematic, you can always edit these scenes differently. You can make them longer, you can make them shorter. And you really have to be decisive. And one of the problems is that when you go into post, you do not like your movie. I have never liked any of the movies at all that I've been there. And I'm always like, and at least when I first started, I was like, all right, I can make this better. Here's how I make it better. And you keep beating it and beating it and beating it, editing it, and it just doesn't get better. And that's just a whole bunch of time that's wasted. Where now I feel like I have a pretty good idea of like, all right, I could probably fix this. is it worth it to fix it or not? Is it going to make the movie that much better? And 99% of the time, it's not going to make the movie any better. I focus mainly on larger pacing issues where the movie slows down, where there are kind of problems, and then obviously pop scares and scary sequences. But for the most part, you know, there's just stuff you wish you could go back and fix, but you just don't have that ability. I think found footage kind of gives you a more realistic approach to, hey, this is what I got. It's a oneer. There's no cuts. I can't change this. I can't manipulate it. Where if you have, cinematic footage where it's the wide, the close up, the extreme close up, the extreme close up, you can sit and play around with that for days. And it may not be any better. And I mean, if you heard us talk about the murder house and, the lock sequence, that was one where I just kind of kept trying to make it better and better and better and just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And sometimes you just got to just be like, all right, sometimes simpler is the best way.
Exactly that. Keep it simple. That being said, I think the next thing I want to highlight is what you mentioned. It really helps with you getting used to pop scares. So I would say scares in general, in the sense of found footage. We mentioned they're always spooky. That's why we're on the hunt for that golden hybrid model that can take the benefits from found footage and the benefits of cinematic and kind of mold it all together. But with that being said, I think it really helps you, if you're in the dark, in the woods, it can kind of get pretty eerie. And again, you're making a horror movie. So I think it naturally will help out. It's a lot easier to fumble a cinematic scare than to fumble a found footage scare, in my opinion, just because you're kind of limited with the options, which means you're limited with, hey, someone's going to pop out and scare me. And if you're in POV, that could be pretty scary.
Yeah, I definitely think the scares, I know we've gotten better at scares, but I definitely think that the found footage just lends itself to scarier atmosphere. The first person stuff just resonates with people. And, if you kind of go back and you kind of look at what James Wan's done with The Conjuring, Insidious, a lot of that stuff is first person or over the shoulder. Sinister is shot the same way. And, that stuff's kind of interesting. And I think that's something that we're going to kind of, mold in there. I think we can add to cinematic movies is that, the oneers or the times where it's going to get scary, where there's going to be pop scares. We could lean heavier on, first person stuff that you see in found footage. But then you also get the reaction shots in there cinematically. And again, this might not work. We might have to kind of separate them a little bit more. But, kind of looking back on it, people really thought The Murder House was found footage movie. And obviously they thought it was found footage because it says the footage was found. But that was also, it's a cinematic movie that had a lot of first person view stuff. And people really liked it. And that was by far our best performing movie on Amazon Prime. So, I think that model might actually work a little bit more. And, just kind of go from there. But, the found footage experience, I think you really have to kind of sit down and figure out if your movie is perfect for found footage and then obviously do found footage. But if it's not, I'd say don't try and push it. That being said, we can watch Girl in Cabin 14 when it comes out, and it could just look absolutely phenomenal and great. And there's been no issues with the found footage stuff. And maybe we'll just keep doing this. But, there's just a lot in me where I'm like, man, I wish I could get this shot. Or there's just really cool ideas that we have now with our team and, Tegan and the special effects. And we're just limited by wide shots, or the camera has to fall on the ground. The camera has to fall in a specific way. And I think that does limit the creativity a little bit. So I think it's there's a high floor but a low ceiling with found footage stuff. But I mean, again, for first time filmmakers just trying to get something else up, I think it's probably your best option.
Definitely agree. Now let's kind of talk about, as always, what are kind of the pros and cons of it. I think one thing that we see happen a lot with found footage, and this is, something you struggle with in all movies, cinematic as well, it's that dreaded P word, it's pacing. And what's really going to happen in found footage that I find, especially with indie filmmakers, is it will drag. And the reason it drags is because if you have cuts, it will at least speed up in thought how fast the scene's going. If you hold a oneer, and what's found footage but a bunch of oneers, it can bog down and slow down a lot. So what are kind of your thoughts on, again, how pacing really plays a major issue or a major role in it? Because again, I watch a ton of found footage movies. We watch a ton of indie features, and even our features, you can just really find, like, again, montages, that's a great thing you can do in cinematic to speed things up. And you can do it. And honestly, I've seen it. I would say the Outwaters actually does it pretty well in the sense of kind of having quick cuts to progress it. And you can do it, and there's kind of thoughts there. But typically, most indie films, most indie found footage features are going to have one person talking for a very long time, which again could be explaining the plot. But if you stack those scenes together, you now have a very slow moving movie.
Yeah, and I think you see this kind of like my only big feedback to myself on Horror in the Forest was, we stacked two really long intros back to back, or not intros, but interviews with Reynolds and with the Nelson character. And both of those were 3-4 minute monologues. And all of a sudden you have 10 minutes of just talking to the camera. And that, makes people bored and tired, especially with the indie movie where they don't know whether or not it should have their full attention. So I understand mocks are popular, but it's a very small segment of a very small segment, which is found footage. Um, so that's like another thing you have to be aware of is it takes a certain person to, basically sit through a mockumentary with a whole bunch of interviews. And at that point, the ones that are really good are the ones with very, very good stories and that have very good acting and are very intriguing. So, I do think a lot of the issues with found footage, why the biggest criticism of found footage is, oh, nothing happened for an hour and then we got 10 minutes of, action, is because that's how it's set up. When you have these long wonders, when it takes forever for someone to keep going, you have no choice. You can't cut this. You can't do montages. You can't do clever cuts. You're basically stuck with the footage you got. And I think if you're not careful when you kind of make these movies as as a director, you could really get yourself in a lot of trouble as far as pacing wise. And, something we're very aware of, we spend a lot of time on, and we still make the same mistakes over and over again. I think we did a better job in Bigfoot, and I think we really took a big we really took the next step up in Cabin 14, but that took us almost 14 movies to figure out really how to get the pacing to where it needs to go. So it's definitely an issue. I think found footage does compound that and make it even worse. But like I said, I think there's the pros outweighs the cons in this, and just getting something done and being able to sit back and learn from your movie and get feedback from your movie. It just makes it that much easier to continue this process.
I definitely agree with that. And, it kind of leads me to the next one where I think it also allows you to kind of become, it forces you to essentially be more creative. But another downside with it is the special effects and gore. I think this is something that we ran into with Horror in the Forest. We've run into essentially every single found footage movie that we've done. It is so much harder for you to really pull off a special effect just because of the limiting factor of you don't want to break away from that scene. And again, we talk about it with special effects all the time. It is a mixture. It is a mixture of the special effects, the prop, and then also Brendan screwing up and, getting the tube in there a few times. So it's kind of that balance that ends up happening where, having the ability to cut away at any point in time with cinematic, you can focus in on an angle that will look perfect for the actual gore, cut to that angle, cut back to a reaction, cut back to that angle, and you're good to go with the gore in the sense of it looking a lot cleaner. Whereas now, we talk about how hard it is just in general, even with cinematic, to make sure you get it. You now have such a limited amount of takes, and typically these takes require the actors and everyone to remember things. So, again, I think this is something where on the grand scale, a lot of these scares can be very, very tricky to pull off in found footage. What are kind of your thoughts on that? Because I think, if you're just doing pop scares like Boo, looks great. But if you're doing some gore and special effects, it can then become a double-edged sword again.
Yeah, the gore and the special effects is a huge con. It's almost impossible to get the shots you want because you're limited by so much. You're limited by not having the inserts, not having the reactions, not having close-ups in there. And I think it was good, and once again, it's good for filmmakers who are first starting out. But we've gotten so much better with Tegan doing the special effects and just our process of learning special effects and shooting special effects that I was just disappointed in Girl in Cabin 14, where I was like, man, I know we can do a better job of this, but we're just limited by this, this found footage. And I definitely think that there's just a lot of scenes that just don't turn out as well. I don't think that like we kind of did shot for shot the scene where Sonny holds up, or the masked men hold up the sign saying, we want the girl. And I'm interested to see how that turns out in found footage versus cinematic. Because when I was doing found footage, I was like, all right, we're getting it. But because you don't have the reaction of them watching the notebook going up on the window, it doesn't have that same impact. And the same thing with, the climax where Sonny kind of smashes the masked man's head in there, where we can get up close and you can see the guts come out of his eyes and you can see the gnarliness of the rock smashing his head. In the found footage movie, the camera's just on the ground and it's from far away. Yeah, it looks cool, but filming it, I was just like, it just doesn't have the same oomph as it does in cinematic, because I think with a lot of scares and a lot of gore, you want that queasy feeling, and the only way to get that is to get it like up close and be personal and right in its face. And with found footage, you really can't kill someone when you're holding a camera. So, once again, it's just there's issues in there, there are pros and cons, but I think there's a reason why you don't see a lot of found footage special effects in there. Is because you just can't do it. It's very difficult to do it. But that being said, we might, it could turn out great. Girl in Cabin 14 could be great with all the special. We'll find out. We're not in there because the special effects in Bigfoot were really, really good, but they weren't killing. They were just basically me finding someone who was mutilated. There was no like action stuff in there. There's one action scene with the Bigfoot, but it's shot in a way that is pro found footage. There's like no one's attacking the Bigfoot with a camera and a knife. It's not in that movie. So I don't know, we'll see. But it definitely is limited, and it's frustrating when you have someone as talented as Tegan and you can't necessarily get all the stuff you want to get. But once again, it's gonna be easy to upload. It's gonna be easy to get this stuff done. And that's the number one goal, is to upload something.
So let's talk about the last thing I want to highlight in this episode that's kind of a pro for the found footage side of things and why we do recommend it. And to me, I think that's the community element. I think especially as a first-time indie filmmaker, you will find, a lot of support and a lot of friends in the sense of the community there. One to highlight is the Found Footage Facebook group. They do an absolutely amazing job. There's a ton of very talented filmmakers in there, but there's a group of hardcore found footage people. Now, I will say we are still kind of in the process of determining monetary-wise what the best path is, because there are two different demographics. One, cinematic favors Amazon a little bit more, which is TVOD, transactional demand, which can kind of give you more of a bigger, payday at first up front. And the other is that subscription AVOD, and that is our Tubi, which found footage, that is the bread and butter of Tubi, is living out there. But I think what's more important with the community is you will get feedback. And we always say, as an independent filmmaker, one of the best things that you can really do is start getting feedback. So I think, again, of all the Facebook forums that we follow and all of the stuff that we watch, we will see our cinematic movies getting shared here and there every once in a while. But more importantly, we will consistently see, anytime we release a found footage movie, that will appear, that will pop up in the found footage Facebook group multiple times. And you will get bunch of comments, whether they liked it, whether they didn't like it. So I think you really kind of, again, as an independent filmmaker, if you're looking for the ability to start your brand, if you're looking for the ability to get feedback, there is a lot of really, really great, amazing directors in that Discord, or in that the Facebook group, that leverage that community, that are keeping up with them. They're making trilogies now, they're making sequels, because they were able to find a community within that found footage group, and that gave them the stability to then make more movies.
Yeah, and I mean, it just comes back to, I think found footage is high floor, low ceiling. If you're starting from scratch and you don't have any fans, you don't have anything to get feedback, you don't have anyone to basically show your movie to, found footage is great, because the found footage people, the true fans of found footage, will devour everything. They're always asking for new stuff. And I mean, they literally watch everything. Like, they're like, I've watched all found footage movies, give me some recommendations, and turns out they've watched everything. So they're very aggressive. They will watch all their stuff, and they're not as mean as like the horror people and the cinematic people. They will accept the fact that it's low budget, that there's some issues with it, that there could be story issues, that there could be pacing issues, there could be special effects issues, there could be acting issues. Acting is another big one. They're much more forgiving of bad acting in found footage movies than, other people are. So all that stuff lends itself to making an easier first step for a found footage director. But at the same time, I think I underestimated how big that group is, or I overestimated how big it was. The found footage people is a very small niche of the horror community. And the problem also is that not only is it very, very small, so they're vicarious and they're very loyal, but they're very, very small. And also, regular horror people really hate found footage. It is like a thing you will see. They do not like found footage. And so it's very polarizing where you'll get the found footage people who will love your movies, but then the horror people will not like your movies at all and it'll be more aggressive on the downvotes. There's like I can't remember what it was, like a meme or something that I saw where it was like, if you go on IMDb, a 6 for a horror is really good, a 5 for an independent horror movie is good, and then a 4 for found footage. So with each step you go down, you knock a point off because just people are not going to like this stuff. It's polarizing as it is. But I just think that the overall reach is a little bit limited. Like Kel said, I think Amazon prefers cinematic stuff. The found footage people, because it's a little bit riskier, they've seen so much found footage stuff, they really wait for AVOD. There is not a lot of people who want to pay for your stuff, which really kind of hurts that original window. And then I do think that people who are browsing on their phones, on Amazon apps, on the TVOD platforms at night, they see that as found footage and they immediately think, oh, it's probably not going to be good, because there is just that built-in connotation that found footage is low budget, it's not very good. And, outside of Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch, and some of the bigger ones, that's probably true. I would say like 90% of found footage I've watched is low budget. And out of that, there's pretty much only a handful that I'd really recommend. So I think those people immediately see this stuff and they kind of are like, no, not for me. And I did kind of try and cheat it a little bit. If you watch our trailers, it's kind of hard to see that it's found footage. We shoot very cinematic found footage, and that's done on purpose to try and, get the Amazon people to give it at least a shot, that it has higher production value. But I didn't see that come across in Horror in the Forest. But that being said, we'll see how it does on Tubi. And then obviously Cold Grave coming up is another shot. Sometimes people just don't like movies. I also know that Amazon's completely broken in August, September, and October. So that also pretty could have had an issue with it. And I haven't seen the earnings statements yet either. So it could have done really well. But just from the metrics that I've seen as far as ranking and placement, out of the last couple of movies, it probably didn't do as well.
Exactly that. So a lot of factors in there. And, we're just trying to highlight kind of on the grand scheme. I think the next episode, what we will do is we will dive into kind of more of the tactical things that we're learning, especially on the next one that we were filming. As always, be sure to take a look at our movies online. Cold Grave could be out by the time you're listening to this. And if Cold Grave is out and you're listening to this and you haven't rented it and given it a review, what are you doing? What are you doing, my friends? We're trying to make more movies here. We're trying to cast more people. We're doing a lot of cool stuff, and we want you to be part of that. So be sure to take a look at our Discord channel online. And as always, my friends, if you go ahead and take a look and support these launches, support other indie filmmakers, then we can make more fun movies together. That being said, have a good one.